Hello, Brawlhalla fans! It's Raidhyn and I am here with the patch notes for beta version 1.15.0 and 0.1. I'm going to be going over all of the wonderful things that have changed in this patch, the first of which is Brynn the Valkyrie has been added to the roster. I know everybody has been very excited about the advent of this legend, and everyone is excited to have another Axe character on our hands, and Brynn looks and feels awesome. So I hope everybody is excited to turn out the new character. She will be temporarily unlocked for everyone before the character rotation goes live. The next most big and exciting thing about this patch is that the guys at Brawlhalla have put all of the balance changes in their own section and included some nice explanations for some of the changes that are going to be impacted by the balance tweaks this patch. There have been quite a few, and so far this patch feels absolutely fantastic. A big part of that is coming from the dexterity, which is the first on our notes. From what BMG says, and I'm going to read this verbatim, we've been in a spot where as we try to increase the speed of light attacks, it always has the side effect of making signature moves unpunishable. This patch, we finally separated the two so that we can adjust them independently of each other. Our goal is to allow high dex characters to execute more pseudo combos by greatly reducing the amount of time that they are in recovery. This is counterbalanced with cooldowns to make sure that you can't just spam the same move over and over. We've also lowered dexterity's effect on signature moves to hopefully give them a little bit more risk instead of all reward. So basically they've split out the dexterity values so that dexterity now affects light attacks and signature attacks separately so that they can better balance the game here and throughout the future. So now with this change, light attacks recovery have reduction from dex has greatly increased. Signature recover from dexterity has decreased and increased the dex scaling factors. So high dex is going to receive the largest benefit, and then 2/3 dex, so like 5 to 3, is essentially the same. Which means that higher dexterity characters are going to be feeling a lot better in this patch. Next up, we have some changes to the Axe. The Axe's air game has been very punishing lately with its fast and wide swings. This may require the Axe to slow down in the future, but we decided to try a different approach first. We've trimmed down some of the more unintuitive hitboxes and are tuning the Axe to reward clean, intentional hits more than catching someone on the follow-through of a swing. So the changes specifically is that the Axe recovery has slightly reduced hitbox sizes, increased damage and force decrease over the duration of the spin, and they remove some hitboxes from the end of the swing, which basically means that you won't be getting super powerful hits on accident at the very end of the move, as was happening fairly often. The Axe ground pound, they fixed some misplaced hitboxes. The Axe neutral air, they slightly reduced the hitbox size. They decreased the damage. It went from about 27 to 18, I believe. They increased the force, and they greatly decreased hitbox size on the first frame of power, and the damage and force decrease after the initial frame. So the neutral air isn't going to be doing as much damage as it used to, and it also won't be knocking people as close, so it'll be a little bit more difficult to juggle people to death with the Axecalator. Next up, the Axe down air has a slightly reduced hitbox size. They increase the damage and the force, and the damage and force decrease over the duration of the swing. So if you hit somebody with it early, you're good. If you hit somebody with it late, it's not going to do as much damage. The Axe side ground, they increase the cooldown time so that you can't just do Axe ground side over and over and over. All right, next up with the Katars. Yes, Katars got changes. We all felt them coming, but they haven't been that very impactful. But let me read the changes verbatim. Nye, Sentinel, and Lucian all had a strong showing in the last patch, particularly in higher rank play. We've heard a lot of requests that Katars be toned down, but just as many that they not be slowed down. Katars in 1.15 will continue to be as fast as ever, but are losing some of their priority and damage. So Katar neutral ground, slightly reduced hitbox size and slightly reduced damage. Katar air side, hitboxes changed to better match animation. Katar recover has slightly reduced hitbox size, and Katar air down has a slightly reduced hitbox size, and they fixed a rare case where it could deal more damage than intended. So Katars are still as fast as ever. Some of the hitboxes have been brought in just a little bit, but playing on some Katar characters last night, they still feel absolutely fantastic, and so I think this change is going to be a good one. Next up, for the Lance, The Lance Downground is a generally unpopular power with a risk-reward trade-off more suited to his signature. We're trying a rework that retains some of its utility for chewing up stacked targets while speeding it up and repurposing it into more of a spacing tool at the expense of damage. Lance Recovery is getting some minor changes that make it easier to land. So Lance Downground has greatly increased power, decreased hitbox size, decreased damage, decreased initial force with increased force towards the end of the power, and the user slides backwards during the power. Lance Downground is now officially useful, and it's a really cool move. You should totally check it out, especially if you haven't picked up the Lance since this patch. For the Lance Recovery, they slightly increase the hitbox size, and it travels slightly farther on minimum charge, meaning that you go a little bit farther when you just tap the button as opposed to holding it down like we see a lot of people do when they're in a recovery scenario. Alright, next up, there are a bunch of changes to combo setups. Now that we've found a place where hard combo setups exist without dominating the game, we're relaxing the reductions on them a bit to make them feel more fluid and valuable. Spear Groundside hasn't been reworked into another combo setup power, but has been adjusted to more easily chain into other powers on a target in white health. So Hammer Down Ground, or the Stomp, is slightly decreased time to hit and recovery time on miss, so they brought down, basically they improved the Stomp all around as far as startup and recovery frames go. The Lance Groundside, they slightly decreased force and aimed force higher, decreased recovery time on miss. The Sword Ground Down has less of a hard stop on miss with decreased recovery time on miss, and the Spear Groundside has slightly increased damage and stun with slightly decreased force. Alright, next up we got some changes to some characters. Lord Vraxx. It's a continuing trend all the way from early alpha that we overestimate how much of a threat Vraxx is. We're improving 2 of his lance signatures to reduce his reliance on the neutral lance sig that was reduced several patches ago. His down lance is now faster and more mobile, and his side lance hits harder. So the Vraxx down lance has a slightly reduced hitbox size, slightly decreased time to hit, slightly increased hit window, increased distance traveled, and increased damage. Next, the Vraxx side lance now has increased force. For Queen Nai, despite numerous reductions to Nai in the past, she continues to be feared at all ranks. While stat and Katar changes should address many of her problems, her down Katar signature is a staple move that needed a little bit of extra risk. So Nai's down Katar, they've increased the recovery time and they've slightly reduced the damage. Next up for Sentinel. With the top win rate of any legend in 1.14, an A+ tier ranking from the community, and a recent tournament win under his belt, it's time for Sentinel to see some adjustments. Both neutral signatures will hurt a bit less, and the neutral hammer has been slowed down. So the Sentinel neutral hammer has increased time to hit and slightly decreased hit window, damage, and force, and the Sentinel neutral Katar has decreased force. Finally, they did fix a lot of dropped attacks where there were a handful of bugs where some powers could drop their targets mid-attack. This includes the Spear Ground Down, the Hattori Side Sword, the Lance Neutral Ground, and the Blaster's Ground Pound. And they fixed bugs where the powers could hit, but for whatever reason, the targets would be dropped. So those are all of the balance notes for this patch. Going back to the main section, there have been a number of other things that have been added, some nice quality of life adjustments. So first off, we've got a big list of community requests, including you can now ignore and unignore users via the lobby list. Dodging while wall sliding will now follow the direction of your inputs instead of just moving away from the wall, which is actually a pretty significant change because now when you're wall hugging, you can dodge in 6 directions instead of the previous away from the wall only. For the show names option has been added to the mini option panel in the main menu screen. The HUD Plus world displays 3-letter names above Legends heads and Legends HUD elements. The HUD displays 3-letter name above Legends HUD elements only, and if you set it to never, it will work like it did in the last patch. They basically cleaned up the UI a little bit so that you can now see character names more cleanly and where the health values of characters are a little bit more obvious. They made a big change to King's Pass. They increased the width of the left platform by 17% and increased the width of the right platform by 22%, with the gap being the same width. So basically, the ground game on King's Pass is now a little bit more useful, and it won't be so difficult for characters who like to play the ground game. On the flat map, one of the test maps, they increased the wall height by 50%. The camera no longer follows throws items that have left the camera bounds, but it does follow items thrown by your opponent in 1v1 games. PC support for Logitech Cordless Rumble Pad 2, Thrustmaster Firestorm Dual Analog 3 has been added, and they fixed Mac support for the Mayflash Wii U game controller adapter. On the UI, HUD elements have been tweaked to be bolder and easier to read, and they scaled down the text in the friends list that describes what a given user is doing at that point in time. Next up, on performance, they did some client performance improvements and fixed an issue where the first blood would cause memory leak, improved client performance with decreased spikes, reduced frame rate drops during gameplay, improved the performance of displaying player names during gameplay, and performance improvements with the in-game HUD. They also fixed a number of bugs, which I'm not going to go over in great detail because I'm just all too excited about all the things that have changed with this patch. If you guys have yet to play on this patch, this is certainly one that you should go and check out. The game feels really fast and fluid, and people are posting all sorts of new combos to the subreddit, and there's a lot of general excitement. I haven't really looked too closely at a lot of the balance changes because I've just been having so much fun with how the new deck scaling is working, and it just feels like faster, speedier characters once again have a really strong opportunity to play the rushdown game and to just get in the faces of those slower moving, heavy hitting characters. So I'm really excited to see how this patch evolves over time. It's going to be really interesting, but for now I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. Shout out to Designated Asian and his stream for allowing me to capture this wonderful footage that you've all seen, and I will see you guys next time for more Brawlhalla.